Hello, everyone. Pastor George here with today's episode of A New Thing. And today I wanted to return to the topic that I began to speak about last week. If you didn't see that video, go ahead and check it out. What I talked about was Israel, Hamas, and the last days. Because anytime anything happens with Israel, everyone thinks, not everyone, of course, many people end up thinking, oh, well, this is the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy. This is the great tribulation that Jesus talked about in Matthew and Luke and Mark. And so this means that the end of the world is coming. And I think that there's a good side to that in the sense that, yes, we should be prepared for Christ to come back any second, and a bad side, because what happens is a bunch of people say that Jesus is going to come back because they don't understand the passages. They don't understand our role as Christians. In what's going on, how does the Bible define us, and then of course like people will say something like we're nanoseconds away, and it's been 3 weeks and things like that, right? So I made that video last week to talk about, and my case was that this argument that we usually see about what Jesus is talking about during the Great Tribulation in the Synoptic Gospels is that it is not a future event that is, well, to Jesus it is, but it's not to us a future event that's going to happen, right? It already happened. It was the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which is important because it's something Jesus predicted, and it completely changes the way that we view Jesus as a prophet, because what he said has come true, right? The temple was destroyed and has not been rebuilt to this day. And so I think it's important for us to remember that. But I wanted to go back into the passage because one of the areas in it that I didn't feel like I did a good enough job at explaining, because I was a little rushed for time, was the idea that this generation will not pass away. Because I think we need to understand what Jesus means by that, because it seems like some of the language that Jesus uses in this passage is apocalyptic, and it is apocalyptic language, but like end of the world stuff, like things that we associate with it being the end of the world. And so how do we deal with that when it says this generation? Because the world did not end. So is Jesus a false prophet? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, right? So last week was all about, well, this isn't about Israel and Hamas, and it's not about like future things. And this week is to explain, okay, well, if it's not about the future, why is it that Jesus says this generation when the world did not end? Because the language that we see here seems pretty apocalyptic. I don't know what to make of it, right? Well, that's why I get paid the big bucks, right, people? All right, so first of all, let's dive back into our text. Let me just pull this up for you guys. So as you can see here, this is the whole thing, and so I just want to point out kind of like what it's talking about, right? So in 29, verse 29 downward, you can see this is what Jesus says. Immediately after the stress of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will not fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. And the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Then will appear the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So the question we have today is this. In verse 34, what is Jesus talking about when he says this generation until all these things? When he says these things, what does he mean? Now, I normally read out of the ESV, just to let you know. That's kind of my preferred translation, but I actually use the NIV because I know it's the one I think most of you use. It's the one we use in church, although we use the older version, which is impossible to find online. It's not impossible, but it's not as easy and is used as it's like not on BibleHub.com or whatever. So it's a little bit more annoying to pull up. And so, but the NIV actually helps me here to kind of show you guys what's going on. So these are the things. So all of this, right? You guys are probably on board if you were to listen to my argument. It makes pretty good sense that Jesus here is talking about in the beginning, right? Where he's talking about, hey, there's going to be armies. They're going to see the abomination of desolation, which is from the prophet Daniel, and that's the Romans who are going to attack and destroy the temple, right? Flee to the mountains, right? So it's something you can run away from on foot. So we know that isn't the final judgment. Problem is what he says at the bottom when he's like talking about the sun being darkened and the moon not giving its light and things like that. So something important to remember about Matthew as a gospel writer, right, as an evangelist opposed to Mark, Luke, and John, is that he is big on Old Testament quotation. All of them do it, right? I mean, I just preached on John this past weekend, and in one little thing, he draws two comparisons to the Old Testament. So it's not as though Matthew's the only one that does it, but Matthew does it a lot more because everyone thinks that basically he's writing for mainly a Jewish audience, right, to convince them that Jesus is the Messiah. So he's always referencing the Old Testament in order to show the connection. Now, in this, right, you have Jesus say the sun will be darkened. You see that happen in the other ones too. But the ESV marks this apart as in a different way, right? So you can see it's like this, and then it goes into what I like to call psalm mode, which you see all over the Bible, right? Which is poetry or something like it's quoting something. And so this was the last thing I picked up. All these other tabs up here I already put in. So I'm wondering if it sends to any of those. So let's just see where it sends. Yeah, so it sends us to two of them, and that's where we're going to look. So I think the key here is where do we see language like this being used elsewhere in Scripture, right? If we are going to understand like what's going on, because when we see this, we immediately go to Revelation. And I think that's fine, right? Because Revelation does use a lot of the similar language. You're going to see some of that in a few other of these verses. But the thing about these other verses is to look at the context of when they were written. So, as an example, let's look at Isaiah 13. I'm not going to read all of this, but I want you to look at the top, right? In 13:1, a prophecy against Babylon that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw. Now, Isaiah is prophesying long before Jesus, right? And it's here, right, that he is showing that Babylon is going to be destroyed. Now, this is not going to take place immediately, right? This is going to be something that happens in the future, but it's related not to, like, I could see someone saying, well, this isn't talking about Babylon. This is talking about Babylon in Revelation. But I think it's pretty clear that, like, Isaiah's prophecy has a real answer because, as you know, the history of the Jewish people is tied up a lot with Babylon, right? They come and they destroy Jerusalem and they take away people into exile. And that's what Isaiah has in mind here, right? That's what he's talking about. It's clear that this is the future prophecy that's going to come because they're going to be Babylon is going to be returned, like things are going to be returned to them for what they've done, right? So it's not this some sort of like Revelation Babylon. It's Babylon the nation that's going to be it's going to be destroyed. So here's the thing to notice, right? This is again Isaiah speaking, God speaking through Isaiah to the people. He says, "See, the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day with wrath and fierce anger to make the land desolate and destroy the sinners within it. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. I will punish the world for its evil, the wicked for their sins. I will put an end to the arrogance of the haughty and humble the pride of the ruthless. I will make scarcer than pure gold, more rare than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make heavens tremble, and the earth will shake from its place, as the wrath of the Lord Almighty in the day of his burning anger. So, right there, right, the stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. You can see, right, the moon will not give its light, stars will fall from the sky. It's very similar language. Okay, maybe it's not plagiarism. Okay, maybe it's not just a direct copy. But what the NIV is doing here is it's showing you that this language that Jesus is using is not unique to this passage. It's used in other places. So if Jesus here is talking about the end of the world, right, well, it seems as though you'd have to explain why it's used in other places for temporal things that are going on, like the destruction of Babylon, for instance. So, like in Isaiah. Now, that's not the only time Isaiah uses this language. He also uses it in the 34th chapter of his book. And this is where he's talking about the judgment against the nations. So you'll see that this language always comes with judgment. You're going to see that in Ezekiel and Joel and Amos as well. This language is always with judgment. And so it's important to remember that, because Jesus here is showing that the temple is going to be destroyed. And he's saying that the Jews are going to be judged for their rejection of him. That's basically my thesis about what he's saying. I think that's what's going on. And I think when you see this language used, you're seeing it used in other places and not just other people. You'll see it used on the Jews too later. So anyway, Isaiah 34. Again, just see if this is going to be familiar to you, right? Come near, you nations, and listen. Pay attention, you peoples. Let the earth hear and all that is in it, the world and all that comes out of it. The Lord is angry with all nations. His wrath is on all their armies. He will totally destroy them. He will give them over to slaughter. Their slain will be thrown out. Their bodies will stink. The mountains will be soaked with their blood. All the stars in the sky will be dissolved, and the heavens rolled up like a scroll. All the starry host will fall, like withered leaves from the vine, like shriveled figs from the fig tree. And then, just in case my sword has drunk its fill in the heavens. See, it descends in judgment on Edom, the people I have totally destroyed. Edom was this other group of people that kind of turns their back and helps the Babylonians destroy Israel. So when it says against the nations, again, like, this is true about, like, these types of things are going to happen in the final judgment. I don't want to say they're not, and maybe you can see the language of Revelation is calling back to these things to show, just like God has judged these other people in the past, he's going to judge us, right? So this is good language, and I'm not against Revelation, but you have to remember that people are preaching and talking in a certain time, right? To a certain people, delivering them a certain message. And Isaiah here is delivering a message to the people of Jerusalem saying, listen, you're going to get destroyed, but Babylon is going to be judged. And the nations that help them are going to be judged, like Edom. And again, you have very similar language. So are all the stars going to be dissolved twice? Are they going to be dissolved when they're dissolved for Babylon's destruction? Are they going to be dissolved when they're dissolved for Edom's destruction? Maybe this is actually metaphorical language about how God is bringing his full wrath upon people, that the way that they understand the world is going to completely change, which is important to understand, especially when it comes to the temple. All right, let's do Ezekiel next. I know it's like a lot, but I think it's just important to really hit this so you guys can see why I believe what I believe. So as you can see, the title for this is The Lament Over Pharaoh. This is Ezekiel, again, preaching about the things that have been going on with Babylon and the captivity. In the 12th year, in the 12th month, on the first day, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, take up a lament concerning Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and say to him. So basically what had happened here is that Pharaoh had, like, the Egyptians, and all right, so because of its location, sorry to bore you guys with this history, but because of its location, Israel was always had to play friends and allies with everyone, because you want to make sure that you're at a crossroads of the world, right? Trade is coming from Egypt, Trade is coming from Babylon. Trade is coming from, those guys up there with the chariots. What are their names? Hittites. So all the trade is coming down from these area, right? And so it's very important that everyone is there to be there through Jerusalem. So it has to go up the Levant or through it or whatever. So a lot of people, and just like today, right, you make alliances in order to defend your territory. So one of the alliances that was made was with Pharaoh. This is actually something God warns against doing, but the people do it anyway because Egypt is a mighty power. But basically, Egypt fails to protect them. So this is a judgment against Egypt, against Pharaoh, that is given by Ezekiel. And again, you're going to see some similar language in 32:7. So he's talking about destroying Egypt. And again, Egypt would fall to Babylon and then to Persia. Basically, Egypt would not be its own state until, it would never really return to the pharaohs that you think about after this. So, this is what he says, right? When I snuff you out, I will cover the heavens and darken their stars. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light. All the shining lights in heaven I will darken over you. I will bring darkness over your land, declares the sovereign Lord. I will trouble the hearts of many people when I bring about your destruction among the nations, among the lands you have not known. I will cause many peoples to be appalled at you, and their kings will shudder with horror because of you when I brandish my sword before them on the day of your downfall. Each of them will tremble every moment for his life. So again, Egypt being this mighty power, being destroyed is going to make everyone else scared because it shows that even this mighty nation can be brought down. And again, you see similar language, right? Darken the stars, cover the sun with a cloud, the moon will not give its light. And sun will be darkened, moon will not give its light, stars will fall from the sky, heavenly bodies will be shaken, right? I can understand why lots of versions don't do what the NIV is doing here, because usually when you do this, it's a direct quote. And this isn't a direct quote. It's basically Jesus taking all of these ideas that he as God has said before when he's talking about judgment and bringing them together. To say that he's bringing judgment, and so that's what that's against. So then we have Joel 2. Joel 2 is great. I love these verses. Again, this is very Revelation, right? There's this army of locusts. And of course, this is very poetic and things like that. But again, this idea of bringing this army of judgment down on people. Joel 2:10. Before them, he's talking about before this army, the earth shakes, the heavens tremble, the sun and moon are darkened, and the stars no longer shine. The Lord thunders at the head of his army. His forces are beyond number, and mighty is the army that obeys his command. The day of the Lord is great. It is dreadful. Who can endure it? And this is a message to the Jews, right? To say, hey, you guys need to get back on track because I'm gonna judge you. Again, this is judgment language. And we say this at least right here, and you can tell he's talking to his people because in verse 12 he says, even now, return to me with all your heart and with fasting and weeping and mourning. And then we say this all the time in the morning prayer. One of our prayer things has this verse, and I love it. It says, rend your heart and not your garments, and return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love, and he relents from sending calamity. I always love that. Rend your heart and not your garments. It's a beautiful way of talking about what God desires us to do, right? Outward display of things, no, right? He doesn't care about outward stuff. What he cares about is what you do on the inside. So anyway, right? Judgment against Israel, and he's bringing this army of locusts. Sun and moon are darkened. Stars no longer shine. You get what I'm saying. Lastly is Amos. And again, Amos is I can't remember, forgive me, if Amos is active in the northern or southern kingdom. It doesn't really matter because his prophecy comes true either way, because both are destroyed in judgment by God. But this is Amos, and this is what Amos is saying, right? This is, God loves doing this with some of his prophets where he gives them kind of a visual lesson for people. So this is what the sovereign Lord showed me a basket of ripe fruit. What do you see, Amos? He asked. A basket of ripe fruit, I answered. Then the Lord said to me, the time is ripe for my people Israel. I will spare them no longer. In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, the songs in my temple will turn to wailing. Many, many bodies flung everywhere. Silence. All right, so not great stuff, right? Go down a little bit. In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. I will turn your religious festivals into mourning and all your singing into weeping. I will make all you wear sackcloth and shave your heads, and I will make that time like mourning for an only son at the end of a bitter day. So, again, this idea of like the darken the earth in broad daylight. All this language is to say that your world is going to be turned upside down. That's like the easiest way to kind of get it, right? All these things, like the way that you experience the natural world is going to change. That's how total my judgment is going to be. That's what God is trying to get us to understand when he says stuff like that. And Revelation is saying the same thing, right? When it's talking about how there's going to be places that are destroyed and where there's going to be the oceans, there aren't going to be oceans anymore, right? It's all this really strong poetic language showing us that the way when God brings judgment, right, like the heavens will fall. What does that mean? Like, think about what that actually means. It means the sky is falling. And, you know, I know we always joke about that word, but what does that actually, like, think about the way we understand that scientifically. We don't think the sky is able to fall because it's just not able to, right? It's not, but that is how world and life-changing this judgment is going to be for us, right? That it's going to feel as though all of these easy ways that we understand the world, right? Nations have borders, mountains look like that, seas look like that, all that's going to be gone. That's how total the change is. So it's really important to see that God uses this language all the time, not always and most of the time in no connection to the end of the world, in connection to human events that happen, like the destruction of Jerusalem, or this destruction of Jerusalem, or the destruction of the northern kingdom, or the destruction of Babylon, or the destruction of Edom, on and on and on, right? Or threats that that if Israel doesn't repent, this is going to happen to them, right? That sort of thing. So that if you go back to what Jesus is saying, and we see that he says the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, people go, oh, that's talking about Revelation. No, it's not. I would argue it's not. I mean, you could make the argument that it is, but I think it's pretty clear that Jesus is talking about something that's going to be a judgment on people, a judgment on who? The Jews, specifically, and the people who have rejected him, right? The Jews who have rejected him. And it's also going to be a complete changing of their world, which it was. Because you have to remember that Jewish religion today is different than the one that's at Jesus' time. At Jesus' time, it was temple-based, right? Everyone went to the temple. They made sacrifices. That is an incredibly important part of their religion. At the time the temple is destroyed, they completely change. The synagogue becomes the center of worship in Jewish religion. That's because the temple is destroyed, right? And they can't do sacrifices anymore. So it does, right? Like what Jesus says here, and now to people today, right? We don't think, oh, okay, well, that's not that big of a deal. Like, in fact, you know, it's kind of easier maybe or whatever. No, to them at the time, that's a huge deal. That's like how they understand their relationship with God. But God brings judgment in destroying the temple and bringing judgment upon the people who have rejected him. So I think it's worth going back to what Jesus says with the fig tree. All right, I made my argument. Either buy it or you don't. But I think it's clear from the language that it's not referring to future, like, Revelation type thing. It's referring to what's going to happen when the abomination of desolation, aka the Romans, come in and destroy the temple and the city of Jerusalem and scatter the Jews everywhere. All right. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. This is what Jesus is talking about, right? So this is another kind of lesson that he's using. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near, right? Just like we know that summer is near when we see the trees flower around us. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. All right, So there, right? What is he talking about? Well, now I do think here Jesus could be referencing to his second coming. Um, I think he's also I do think that's what's happening, but I think that when he says so when he's saying that it is near, right? Let's just see what they say, or he, right? So it could be that he's talking about himself. When you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. Um, and so I think he's talking about his second coming here, right? But then there's a shift, right? Because there's a break there, and then it's verse 34. Truly, like, honestly, if I really wanted to point this out to people, I'd probably break this off, because again, in Greek, all of this is not one sentence, but one thing, all connected, right? All of these periods and verses are things we've added, quotations. I'd break this off, but I would say, truly, I tell you, so it's clear that Jesus changes modes here. This generation will certainly not pass away until all of these things have happened. Right? Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So what things? Well, I don't think he's talking about the second coming. I think what he's talking about here is he's talking about this judgment that's going to happen on the people of Israel. And so they are going to know that these things are going to happen, right? All this stuff happens in Jesus' lifetime or right after it in this generation. And so he wants to make clear that to the people that he is showing them that judgment is coming for Jerusalem. That's why he curses the fig tree, right? This is a common kind of thing that Jesus is doing. I know the fig tree thing is not everyone's favorite passage, because like people don't really get why it's necessary or what's going on. But when you realize that it's all in this box together, talking about this judgment, that Jesus is like, all right, I'm bringing judgment on the temple for people who have rejected me. That's why people get so mad at him, right? Because they understand that it's about them. All right, that's what I wanted to talk about. I hope that gave you a lot better understanding of what I'm getting at there. And hopefully it did it a little bit better justice. This has been like a total of almost an hour on this, so don't worry, I'm done talking about this. I will see you guys on Sunday for worship. I don't know what I'll talk about next week. I'll figure that out when the time comes. But anyway, have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and I will see you when I see you. Peace out.